Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Well, hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB, and tonight I have joining me a veteran journalist who has won many awards, DuPont Columbia, Peabody when he worked in commercial television, but he knows a little bit about public broadcasting because we've been married, 32 years.
How could I not learn a little bit about it?
That's right.
That's right. Well, you know what, Beth? This, of course, is election season. And in a little over 30 days, Louisiana citizens will be asked to choose a new governor, 6 statewide elected officials, and 8 members of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And if they live in a legislative district that drew opposition, they'll also vote on state senators and representatives, as well as a number of local races.
Well, what's on the minds of Louisianians as they make these decisions? And what's on the agenda of those running? What are the challenges that elected officials face at the Capitol? And what issues will education leaders have to tackle over the next hour? We will hear from campaign experts, academics, and voters as we explore these issues and more on Agenda Louisiana. LPB recently partnered with Southeastern to allow students to ask questions of the candidates at the first statewide televised gubernatorial forum. 3 of the 4 candidates for governor appeared. U.S. Senator David Vitter, considered the frontrunner, said he could not attend. One of the students' primary concerns, the stability of the state college scholarship program, TOPS. State Representative John Bell Edwards said the program's cost has ballooned.
We have to be honest. It started off as a $60 million program per year. Now it's at $280 million, and it's on the way to $400 million if we don't do something.
Students questioned how candidates could help their ability to find a job when they graduate. Lieutenant Governor Jay Darden says the state needs a better climate for businesses.
Government is not responsible for creating jobs. It's responsible for creating an atmosphere that lets the private sector create jobs.
And students want to know whether Louisiana's communities will be safe for their future families. Public Service Commissioner Scott Angel said he would address poverty.
The best way to get rid of crime is to give people an opportunity for a job. The best social program is an opportunity for a job.
But a recent survey shows that these students are not in the norm. Voters aren't always well educated on the issues or even paying attention. Michael Henderson is the Director of Research at the Public Policy Research Lab.
For voters, politics is not an everyday business. Policy is not an everyday business the way it is for candidates or public officials or analysts or the media. They just don't pay as much attention to it. They dedicate their lives to work, caring for family, play, what have you.
They often have contradictory opinions on what they want government to do and what is possible, Henderson says.
So on the one hand, we know they like higher education and we know they want funding for higher education. But over here, when we ask them about raising revenue, they're not so keen on the idea of raising, income taxes, sales taxes, and a variety of other taxes. So what does the public want? They kind of want it both ways.
But appeasing them on policy issues shouldn't worry candidates at this stage of the campaign. A candidate's brand makes a stronger impression on voters. That's according to Pearson Cross, an associate professor of political science at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette.
The public doesn't really get specifics. The public gets impressions. People seem to vote on the basis of their impressions. That's why one of the statistics that's most important for elections is likability or favorability. So if people feel good about a candidate, they're likely to pull the lever.
When candidates officially signed up for the race in September, they pushed their brand. Angel, for example, is painting an image of himself as a Louisiana family man.
I'm excited about introducing my brand of politics to Louisiana, which is a brand of politics that says not only does policy matter, but people matter too.
Vitter is touting his lengthy campaign platform.
We have a detailed 60-plus page plan. No other candidate in this race has anything similar.
Edwards says what sets him apart is his record standing up to Governor Bobby Jindal.
Well, we've got to put Louisiana first. That's not just the theme of the campaign, it's what I'm going to do as governor.
And Darden says the next governor will need experience.
I think as you compare the four of us who are candidates right now, no one has the breadth of experience that I have.
At the end of the day, likability won't make someone a good governor. Robert Travis Scott is president of the Public Affairs Research Council. He says the next leader of the state will face real issues.
They're going to be dealing with the current year budget, which is already falling behind in how much revenue we need to meet our budget. Then they're going to have to be dealing right away with the budget for the next fiscal year. And then they've all been talking about a long-range plan to restructure how we do our fiscal policy in this state.
And the governor will have to make tough choices to solve the problems. They have options, but all are what Scott calls political dynamite.
There's probably a certain amount of dedications that could be freed up and reprioritized, okay? And there's all kinds of special dedications in the budget. That would be one place to start. Another place would be to make sure that in our tax credits and tax exemptions, that this becomes part of our budgeting process, that we're actually making a conscious decision on how much we want to spend on these types of programs.
In addition, Scott says the governor will need to re-examine fundamental priorities.
We spend a lot of money on local governments. And a lot of that is, I'm sure, for good causes in many cases, but is that the highest priority for the state and where we should be spending it?
Joining us to explore Agenda Louisiana is our studio audience. It includes a pollster, political media experts, policy advocates, and members of the Democrat and Republican parties. We also have students from the Legislative Youth Advisory Council from Baton Rouge and St. Gabriel. I want to thank everyone for being here and joining us this evening. LPB asked viewers and social media followers to participate in an online survey on tonight's topic. Over 100 viewers responded. And here's a look at some of the findings. When we asked survey takers about the three most important issues in the fall elections, 53% said the budget and taxes were the top priority. Health care followed close behind with 43%. 41% chose K through 12 education. Now that aligns with a scientific survey produced by LSU's Public Policy Research Lab. It's called the Louisiana Survey. According to their results, education and the economy are routinely most important to voters. When choosing who to elect to Bessie, Common Core state standards are the top priority for 31% of respondents to LPB survey. 18% said they prioritize teacher accountability. 16% say they would decide their vote based on the candidate's position on whether to retain State Superintendent John White. 12% valued a candidate's position on charter schools most, and 6% favored school choice. 15% were undecided or said their answer was not available. Many responders wrote in that they prioritize a candidate's position on early childhood education. LSU's Louisiana survey also found high support for quality early childhood education. Over 3/4, 76% of respondents are in favor of more state funding for that area. Surprisingly, respondents said they would be willing to pay higher taxes for universal pre-K. 57% said they would pay a sales tax. 52% said they would pay a higher property tax. And finally, 37% of respondents to LPB survey said they would choose a state senator or representative based on their position on the budget and taxes. Next came early childhood education with 18%. That was followed by K through 12 education at 11%. Coastal conservation, health care, and higher education were all tied with 6%. So, let's start there. What do you think the top issue in this race is, and how do you think the candidates have done in addressing that issue? And I'll start with somebody and pick the first person for the first question, and that's Patty.
Hi. I think early childhood education is a main topic because if we don't start there, then it's not going to matter K through 12 or higher ed. We have to start at that level to get to the other levels of this race. So the candidates are going to have to see, is it going to be in the budget? Is it going to be with taxes? Is it going to be a connection with John White? So it's an important concept for early childhood.
Do you think the candidates are addressing it?
No, the only one so far has been David Vitter. In his commercial, he actually spoke about early education. That's been the only one.
Okay. Are you disappointed in that?
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously. Okay, well, Quint, let me go to you. What do you think the top issue is in this race, and how do you think the candidates are handling it?
As an LSU student, I'm probably a little biased, but I'm going to have to say higher education, especially after we've seen several years of immense cuts to higher education institutions across the state, public higher ed. I think it's, what we hear from gubernatorial candidates whenever they visit us on campus, at least, is that this is the training grounds to establish a more stable economy. And if they want to indeed do that, I think they need to refocus their efforts on higher education in the state.
And how are they doing in addressing it?
In my opinion, not great. That's not entirely their fault. Higher education across the state is not constitutionally protected. It's as much fault of the legislator as it is of the governor's office. But we have a lot of work to do.
Dawn, what do you think the top issue is in this race, and are the candidates addressing it?
I would also have to stick with education. But I would focus, I would highlight K through 12 education. I do agree that early childhood education is important, very important, but we sometimes don't take note of that drop at the 3rd and 4th grade levels. Children, and I speak from experience as a mother of 2 young men, children, it's very common for children come the 4th grade for there to begin to be 3rd and 4th grade for there to begin to be huge disparities. That's where that's the grade in which, and so that K through 12 I think is very important. Early childhood is absolutely very foundational, but not without looking at those early grades as well.
Sure. Okay. No one has mentioned yet budget and taxes. Is that a big issue? I know it's a big issue for some of our panelists. Go ahead.
I think the challenge definitely will be in the budget and tax arena, and I think the stakes are very high because you're talking about a situation where the next governor elected is going to have a budget situation that has to be fixed rapidly, almost like what happened to the governors who were elected in 1995 and 1983. And the thing is, the solution that the newly elected governor pursues will basically define his governorship until 2020. So this is a very high stakes decision that will have to be made almost certainly in a special session early next year.
Mm-hmm. Are the candidates really addressing the issue, or are they just talking around it?
They're talking around it because it would be highly politically risky to speak the obvious truth as to the fiscal and or taxation fixes that would have to be done.
So in other words, trying not to alienate anybody they might hurt later.
Correct.
Taking the safe side. Anyone else who wants to talk about budget and taxes? I mean, it came up as a high issue. Yes, Jack?
I think it's impossible to talk about any other budgetary issue without talking about the budget. You know, we can't really talk about funding education unless we address constitutional dedications and protections for all other areas of the budget rather than education. So unless we fix the budget issue, we can't be sure that higher ed is going to get money. We can't be sure that early childhood education is going to get money. So I think that's the reason it's the paramount issue.
And in many cases, especially higher education, is kind of taking the short end of that stick because of budget problems.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Absolutely.
And what about, I mean, how do you feel about the way the candidates are addressing the issue?
I would tend to agree. They've tried to talk around it as best they can. You know, I looked at, I examined David Vitter's platform for a class, and he doesn't really propose any specific fixes to the budget other than talking about possibly eliminating some constitutional dedications, and all the candidates dabble in that kind of talk, but they never say anything concrete. They don't have and especially for Vitter, for all of his talk about having a 60-page plan, he doesn't really give any specifics in there.
Sarah, I see you shaking your head a lot. You're going to jump in on this.
Oh, no, I just completely agree that they are talking around the subject because it would be politically unsound to start naming names about who they could cut in the future. I do believe that they could start pointing out some things that maybe wouldn't be highly controversial. I know tax credits in Louisiana are very high, and I don't think we're getting our return on them necessarily for the state. So that could be a possible thing they could look into cutting.
Now, another big item that we saw in the surveys was health care. And how are the candidates doing in addressing the health care issue? Yes, sir.
Not very well. My issue is expansion of health care to low-income and minority people, which happens through the Medicaid expansion, which I'm sure you've heard about. All the candidates kind of waffle on it, say maybe we'll do a waiver, maybe we'll do this and that. In the meantime, health care is virtually disappearing in Baton Rouge, for example, for low-income and minority people. North Baton Rouge doesn't have an emergency room, doesn't have a hospital, and this is urgent. We need some deep change in health care policy.
Do you feel like health care is in crisis right now?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyone else on health care? Yes, ma'am?
Well, I'm representing rural hospitals, of course, and I think that, you know, healthcare is fundamental. I know we say education's important, but I do think that having healthy lifestyles and being healthy is fundamental to economic development and everything else that we're trying to do. So I believe that we should have more healthcare provided through our state programs, so that we don't have underinsured and uninsured who don't have access to care because of that, and the disparities that result from that. And most of the time it is in you know, different socioeconomic sectors that it impacts the most. And I believe that we ought to have health care for all, and so I think health care is very important to this race. I do think that the candidates are addressing it, at least to the hospital associations. They've been, you know, coming and talking to us, and they're saying that they would support some sort of Medicaid expansion. So we're hopeful that that will be high on their agenda when whoever comes into office.
But right now, are you hearing anything specific that gives you any encouragement to believe that it's going to be addressed?
We just had a meeting this morning where the candidates came, except for Vitter, and Angel said that he would support some sort of Medicaid expansion. So did Darden, and so did Edwards. So they're not being real specific, I agree, as to what that plan would be and what type of waiver they would be willing to accept. I think they're wanting to make sure that there's an out for the state in case the feds change the way that the percentage of what the state has to pay versus the federal government. But they sound to me like they are willing to go forward, and the hospitals certainly are supporting that.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. When we return, our panel will join us to further explore Agenda Louisiana. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing Louisiana's fall elections. Joining us now is our panel. Joshua Stockley teaches political science at the University of Louisiana at Monroe. His teachings and research cover state and local politics, campaigns and elections, and public policy. Camille Conaway is the Vice President of Policy Research at the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. Prior to joining LABI in 2013, Conaway served in a variety of positions in the public and private sectors, including policy director in the office of Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Reverend Raymond Jetson is a community activist and former state representative. The mission of his latest project, called Metromorphosis, is to develop engaged citizens in inner-city neighborhoods to design and implement sustainable solutions to persistent community challenges. Barry Irwin is president and CEO of the Council for a Better Louisiana. CABLE is a statewide nonprofit membership organization that works on issues that impact the quality of life in Louisiana. Now, before we go to our audience questions, I'd first like to ask each member of our panel to speak to the biggest challenges facing the leaders in our state as this election comes about. And we'll start down on the end.
Well, I think the biggest issue that's going to face both the governor and the legislature is going to be related to the budget, and how are we going to pay for the programs that we want to fund, because the citizen seems to be telling us that we want to fund a lot of things. But how are we going to pay for that when nobody wants to make a sacrifice, take a cut, or raise their taxes? So it starts with the budget, solving a structural deficit both in this year's budget and next year's budget, and creating a roadmap to avoid these structural deficits every year that we have to go through the budgeting process.
All right. Camille Conaway, how about you?
I would agree with those comments, and I would add, I think it's clear that regardless of who wins and becomes governor, there will be no clear and obvious overwhelming mandate. So this governor is going to have to work with people from both parties, with rural and urban Louisiana. They're going to have to put together a consensus agenda to tackle some really difficult problems. So getting that message across to the public and working with both sides to tackle those fiscal challenges, hopefully put that behind us before we can move forward and talk about some other issues. But absolutely, right out the gate, dealing with the state budget and the taxation system will be that first big challenge.
Reverend Raymond Jetson.
Excuse me, I don't disagree that we have a tremendous problem with our budget, but I think that the real issue is a bit higher than that, and it is, what is the vision for the state of Louisiana? We are fixing the budget, we are changing the taxation system, we are dealing with tax credits and other things. To what end? What is the vision for a better Louisiana, and what is it that either one of these candidates wants to use the resources to support to make the state of Louisiana better? And what I've not heard from anybody is, here's my vision for this state.
Barry Owen, what about you?
Well, I kind of agree with what Raymond said on that. I think we've heard a lot of specific things, or at least semi-specific things in general areas, if you want to call it that, but we haven't really heard that vision thing. And I think that really is kind of where you need a governor to try and lead us to what, just like Raymond said. But I think we heard about early childhood education, we heard about health care, we heard about higher education. I think those are all subsets of this bigger issue about the budget, and I think all of those things are part of that vision, but we need to have them kind of pulled together so that we can kind of have a direction that shows exactly where we want to go over the next 4 years.
And you don't think any of the candidates have really expressed a vision, what their vision for Louisiana is?
They haven't, and that's kind of unfortunate, because I think that's what people are actually looking for. It's like, we know we've got hard choices. We've been hearing that over and over again. We know higher ed is challenged. We know health care is challenged. We know all that, but where is it you're going to take us from where we are now to what is it that we're headed towards? And we haven't heard that really.
Right. We also have a kind of a situation where we also see that candidates really want to avoid talking about any specifics. So how can they have a vision if they can't talk about specific ways to acquire that vision?
I actually think casting a vision might be the most reasoned way to avoid some of the prickly particulars of the campaign. But we want to do what with education? Toward what end? What is the future of higher education in this state? To what end will we make changes to early childhood education? How does all of this impact workforce, health care? I mean, it's easy to talk about dancing around the fringes of Medicaid expansion, and Medicaid expansion is a critical issue, but what does the future of health care look like in this state? What does it look like in inner city neighborhoods? What is the vision for all of these various areas that people are dancing around the fringes and saying what their polling data suggests is safe to say?
Camille, you agree that vision might be a problem, that no one's really expressed a vision? Or do you
I do. And as I listened to Reverend Jetson articulate that, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think we all are looking for what's that next horizon for Louisiana look like? Is it jobs for tomorrow? Is it economic growth? Is it a healthy population? Is it, tell us exactly where we're going to go. And I think that the discussion in Baton Rouge has become very Baton Rouge centric and very much inside the Capitol, where we're obsessed with the budget and the tax system and policy wonk dream for those of us that are policy wonks. Sure. But if you're standing in line in a grocery store, what matters to people today? And they're probably not going to go straight away to the state budget. I do think they have to address that issue to get to that vision, but articulating that vision and speaking to us on a level we can really grasp is something I think we're missing so far.
Well, we've got this audience here, and they all have questions for you. And I want to go first to Dwayne. Dwayne, you're going to get the first opportunity to pose a question to our panel.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I think everyone in this room can agree that our biggest issue is, of course, the budget. But Louisiana faces a lot of issues during this election. And one of the main ones is, of course, higher education. Being a high school senior at the Iberville Math Science Arts Academy East on the midst of graduation, post-secondary education matters very much to me at this point in my life. So I just want to know what candidate can put forth that vision for higher education that we need, all the seniors around this great state need to hear from the candidates.
Who wants to take that one?
Well, since I have a high school senior at home, that we've been talking about college, and unfortunately the conversation continues to evolve to an out-of-state conversation because of many of the challenges that are faced here in Louisiana in higher education. I think that, and I hate to keep going back to it, but I think that that has to be a part of a larger vision. It depends upon what is it that we're trying to create in this state, and how do we marshal the forces necessary to make what will be very, very difficult decisions. Absent some overriding goal that we're trying to achieve, what the conversation always devolves to is me protecting my special interests and this negotiating and horse trading to secure enough votes to do parts of things rather than this comprehensive picture. And so I think higher education has to be a part of a much larger picture of what Louisiana looks like 4 years from now if person X, Y, or Z is elected governor.
What's your vision, Reverend Jetson?
I think that there are some critical issues that we have to address. I think that we have to have a healthy and educated workforce. We are experiencing a huge boom in opportunity, particularly in South Louisiana, but I think that there are opportunities for Central and North Louisiana. But the issue is, if we have people who don't have access to quality health care, are not in a system that takes them from early childhood through higher education and prepares them through a number of different areas to take advantage of the opportunity, we're going to miss it again. And as you well know, our history is filled with opportunities that we've missed because we were not thinking about the big picture.
Thinking about the picture. You have a follow-up, Dwayne?
I'm done with dumb. This election has to be all about what is smart for Louisiana. And I think what is smart is investing in the young people of this state, because when you invest in young people in education, the return is greater, not just for them, but for the collective as well. So I think that's important when the candidates realize that education has to be at the top of their agenda.
Okay. Andrew.
Sure. I think one of the things that probably overrides all of these issues is Louisiana's systemic poverty. And we've been one of the poorest states for years. I think the census has reported we have the highest poverty rate in the nation now. This is after 7 years of supposed economic growth, likes of which we apparently haven't seen in our history. I'd like to see which gubernatorial candidate will affect the the system that sort of drives poverty. And that's to do with a regressive tax code, that's to do with lack of health care, that's to do with education opportunities. This is a systemic problem. I think we have really little to show from in terms of the gubernatorial race so far. I'd like to see who would address that best.
Joshua, you want to take that?
I think Andrew makes a great point. 1 in 5 residents in this state, that's 900,000 people, live below the poverty line. What's even worse than that is 28% of the children in the state live below the poverty line. That's over 300,000 kids in this state below the poverty line. And Andrew makes a great point. And the candidates have focused so much on transportation and infrastructure and the budget that we've lost sight of that other population, oftentimes because we don't want to see that population and we don't want to talk about or acknowledge its existence. And the candidates have done, I think, largely a good job of dancing around that. I will give credit, I think, and some credit should go perhaps to Representative Edwards, because he has talked about raising the minimum wage, which is an issue that substantially affects that population. He's talked about being an advocate for Medicaid expansion. And so, those would be 2 examples of the issues that would do something to help alleviate our poverty. And it costs the state money. I mean, our Medicaid budget has gone up not because of federal mandates and simply because health care costs, but as our poor population increases, so do our mandated costs to that population. We're losing about $1 billion every time we go up in the poverty scale. So that's $1 billion we could be spending on higher education, early childhood education, infrastructure, budget, a lot of projects.
You know, we've got some other students here, and I'm just wondering if any of those would like to talk about the whole issue of how important education is and addressing education in a meaningful way. How about you, Sarah?
I do believe that for us to have a really sound population and to try and keep our population when it grows from early childhood to K through 12, higher education, to retain them in our state, I would like to know what the state's doing to tell our young people, hey, there are jobs available, we do value your education, we are going to have an affordable way for you to attain higher education. I just want to know what the gubernatorial candidates are doing to maybe address the youth population's issues in that region.
Well, it's hard to retain our population when the message is going out that we're cutting our universities by $700 million, and then we're going to double what we charge you to come to the universities that we've cut by $700 million. And all of the candidates, unfortunately, I think in higher education have talked in generalities. And the problem there is that of political reason. Once they come out hard and fast in favor of a particular tax increase or ending a particular tax break, now you've alienated a substantial or a significant portion of the population. So why irritate them now when you can irritate them later after you've become elected?
I want to go to Martin Johnson because as I know that you left the state and you came back. And being in education, I mean, how does this all ring for you?
Well, you know, Louisiana faces challenges, but still is an amazing, wonderful place. We have so much to be happy with, so much to be proud of, and such a bright future. I think that you know, looking to leadership to confront these challenges is critical for our future. I was drawn back with a combination of a job opportunity and having family roots, and so I'm very pleased to be back in the state, but concerned, as I think a lot of us are, about what's going to happen. In the immediate short term, with projected shortfalls coming into a potential special session in the spring. These are all challenges that they'll face, and right now we've heard they're all supportive of higher education, but we're also hearing a lot about tax cuts and things that are not entirely consistent with an expansion of opportunities in education and other areas.
What about that, Barry?
Well, I would agree with that, and I think if there is something positive, you know, going on in this campaign, and I'm going to be the first to say there are no specifics out there. There are not any. However, I can't really think about a campaign where higher education was as higher on the radar screen as it is right now. I can't think of an election when early childhood education was even mentioned as part of a thing. So I think when you start to say these are priorities, and healthcare I put in that as well, but we're talking about education, but when you start to say these are priorities, even though they haven't really given us any specifics, they can be held accountable for dealing with those and addressing with them. And to the point that was made earlier, I don't think we're going to get too much in the way of specifics around taxation or the budget or those types of things, because politically it's just kind of suicide. But if you do raise these issues as priorities and say you are going to address them, and I promise you I will as governor, then you can be held accountable for that. And I think even that is at least some positive thing.
Well, I want to go, Patty has been very patient back there. I know she has a question she wants to.
Well, I represent the early education and care field, and so my biggest question has to deal with the budget and tax credit, and our system has awarded a lot of tax credits, and one of them, the big one, is the school readiness tax credits, which is unique. It has been shown that nationally as a unique way to award teachers and staff, parents, providers, and businesses that give money to it. Are they going to keep them? Especially ours, the school readiness. It has a direct link to quality, so that quality is important for the K through 12 and the higher ed. So is there any hope that the administration going to keep this unique tax credit?
I think the one universal thing we're hearing as the candidates discuss tax reform or changes to the tax code is value and return on value. And it's hard to argue that school readiness tax credit is not adding value to the state. How that's defined, I think we've yet to be seen, but I think that putting tax credits through that lens is important. And a lot of people aren't aware that those kind of tax credits are even out there. We do have $7 billion coming up on $8 billion of tax credit. The largest one is the federal deduction that everyone in this room takes. That's $1 billion. And so a lot of us are benefiting from these. The question is going to be, what's the value and the return on the value for the state?
Reverend Jetson, you sat in the legislature. You have dealt with budget battles and tax credits. You feel like we have too many tax credits on the books?
Yes, and I think that they are there without some coherent strategy to yield some result and to make certain that there is some tangible return on the investment.
Credits, however, when voted on, are always popular, right?
Well, yeah, they are very, very popular, along with the challenges in the difficulties, on the other hand, of reducing the budget or taking away something that has been given to people in the past.
Yeah. I want to go to Pat. Pat, you have not spoken yet, and I know that the budget is an issue on your mind.
Well, I'm very much a conservative, and I know we have to balance the budget. It just seems to me that it's a shame that higher education and health care always gets cut so drastically for a lot of reasons. And there's another segment of our population, I think, and that's the older citizens that, come here to retire, or they come here because they love Louisiana, that need special attention sometimes, not to mention our veterans certainly do too. So there are all kind of segments of the population that we need a good vision for.
I would certainly agree with that, but I think that where it becomes critical is, what does this all mean for the state's finances? The reality is, we will never have enough money to do what everybody wants us to, and so it becomes a matter of a specific set of priorities that, when elected governor, either one of these candidates will move forward. And I, for one, am just not comfortable that I've actually heard anything in terms of a compelling direction for the state. We've mentioned the matter of poverty. Obviously, the K through 12 education, early childhood education. But if we are not careful, and if there's not a specific attention given to the matter of poverty in its two greatest concentrations, in rural Louisiana and in urban communities, pretty soon higher education is going to be a privilege for the elite. When you live in a state where almost 60% of African American boys don't graduate from high school, and there isn't a vision that is put forth to address the issues that are eating at inner city neighborhoods in our state, as well as rural communities, poverty will only grow and increase. And many of the things that we are talking about will become privileges for those who are well-to-do and can afford to do it on their own.
Mary, you had a follow-up to that.
Yeah, I would just like to follow up to Raymond's point about the vision and the direction. I think we all agree that there are a lot of very, very difficult decisions that need to be made about the budget, about cuts, about dedications, all these really, really hard political decisions. But lacking that vision piece or that direction, it makes it harder to do that. It's easier to try and bring people along if you know the direction that you're going. If we're just talking about individual issues in silos, which I think to a large degree the candidates have been doing, it's a lot harder if you don't tie that all together into this kind of directional vision. And I think to that point, if we could get that and if we could have it, it's going to make it a lot easier for the next governor and the next legislature to kind of move in that direction of making those tough decisions that are best for the overall good of our state. I think it's critical to the success of whoever is elected.
Often it's easier to speak to constituencies rather than it is to speak to the general populace as to what your vision is.
Absolutely. And if you want to go back to history, I mean, Buddy Roemer, if you want to go back to there, he gave people a vision. This is the direction we're going to go. You're going to like it or not, but this is what we're going to do. Slay the dragon, all of those types of things. And he pushed things, and we got a lot of stuff done. There were some other issues that happened there, but I think it takes that kind of a voice or that kind of a leadership to kind of bring the rest of the folks along.
Leadership is that's the right word. Hollis, I think you wanted to.
Sure. Just with the attention to the Bessie elections, there's a lot of attention around the state. Can you talk about that? Or are the Bessie candidates being very specific? Are there certain areas that they're being specific in that they're going to address for public education? Are they speaking in generalities? And maybe what are the 3 pressing issues that are facing the Bessie candidates?
Transparency, transparency, transparency. I think the greatest risk, because that is the seed of so many of the critical policies around education and education reform in our state, I think before anyone goes in and pulls a lever for a member of Bessie, they need to be really clear about what they stand for and what is their perspective on education. To not get caught up in Common Core, not Common Core, and other things, but to really understand what people believe about the education of children in this state.
Anybody else want to?
Well, I would agree totally. I don't think we know where most of these people stand. With the incumbents, we do, because they have a record and we've seen what they've done while they're there. But we have a lot of new faces that are running this time, particularly in this area, but in other parts of the state as well. And I don't think we know what the vision or the position of a lot of those people are on that. I will say, to our point, at Cable, we have sent a survey out to every Bessie candidate. I don't know if they'll all respond, but we've tried to hit a bunch of those issues, and we are going to post those on our website when we get the responses back. But I think it's absolutely critical that voters really do understand what one candidate says versus the other, because there are some very clear distinctions, but I don't think they're widely known.
Wanda, you were raising your hand there.
Yes, I think we all agree, that we don't want to cut education, we don't want to cut health care. And every year, they can't balance the budget, they don't have enough money. So what are they going to do? So my question is, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to have a constitutional convention where we change the Constitution in order that education and health care doesn't have to take the hit every year? Because it seems like it's just annually that it happens. And how many times, I happen to be the wife of a doctor, how many times are we going to cut the doctors and what they can charge, $100 charge, and you end up getting 40, and the hospitals. What if you ever look at your bill? Maybe it was $22,000, and they decide to discount 15 or something.
Does anyone understand their hospital bill?
Yeah, really.
It's like your phone bill. Joshua?
I don't think our legislators at this point have the stomach for a constitutional convention. I mean, our Constitution's only 40 years old, and it's been amended already 300 times. Our national Constitution is 220 years old. It's only been amended 27 times. It would be, on the one hand, very nice to scrub clean our statutory dedications and many of the expenditures we've created, so that when we talk about a $26 billion budget, we're actually talking about $26 billion that we can do something with. We don't have the money. It always irritates me when I hear that we don't have the money. A decade ago, our revenue loss was in the realm of about $2.5 to $3 billion. Our revenue loss is now about $7 to $8 billion. We're talking about a $1 billion deficit. The money is there. We actually have money. We don't have the money to spend it on everything, but we certainly have enough money to prioritize plenty of things. But we've made too many promises to too many particular groups. And I think it's going to be very important. The legislators will need the stomach to stand up to particular interest and say, hey, look, I know you might support this tax expenditure or this tax expenditure, but we can't tax expenditure everybody. Some of these things need to be reviewed because they're only benefiting one or two groups or one or two companies. The money's there. We've got to be more efficient with how we're spending that money.
Michael.
Thanks. I'll say this, recognizing that all of us have families and have to budget and prioritize, how we spend our money. My question really kind of goes to the fact that we know parents have to work, but we also know that they need child care to be able to work. But at the same time, the child care assistance program has been cut by 60%. It's reduced the number of slots from 40,000 to 15,000. And we know that there's zero funds appropriated for, early childhood education to children under the age of 4. So I'm really interested in hearing kind of what the candidates have to say about expansion of early care and education, especially to those folks that are poor and couldn't otherwise afford it.
Before the specifics of your question are responded to, Michael, I would like to suggest to you that the overwhelming majority of the citizens in this state don't know the things that you just said, because they've not been brought forth. What has been brought forth is kind of this beautiful picture of things changing in our state. And so while there's this kind of broad recognition that education, higher education in particular, and healthcare are always on the chopping block, I think that those kind of things, which were, in my opinion, the result of this we must do more with less mindset to its extreme, that most people don't realize those kind of things have taken place and the impact that they really have on people who are hardworking and attempting to contribute to the well-being of this state.
I'm certainly hearing more from the business community today than probably years ago, that they understand the importance. I'm just hoping that influence will change the narrative, and the next governor will talk about making a commitment to something that's longer term, because child care is not a short-term solution; it's a long-term solution.
Andrew,
I want to talk about something that hasn't been mentioned, but I think political reform is so important, and what I mean by that is tackling what you see as a broken system, what voters see as a broken system. And tax expenditures is really a symptom of that broken system, in which there are really special interests that get a tremendous amount of play in Baton Rouge, and voters and generally the population get short-sighted. And I think because of the broken system, people don't feel as though they have the ability or even the chance to change it. And I think you see that with what Secretary Shedler talks about as voter apathy. You see the interest in the election waning. You see all of these different factors in which voters feel more disconnected from government. These problems continue to persist, and you have very little authenticity from any of the candidates. They're afraid, they stay in their lanes. I think that's the most tremendous difficulty we face, both as a nation but also as a state. It's filtered down to the state. We're seeing the nationalization of politics.
Does that apathy have something to do with the fact that so many candidates are unopposed in the legislature?
Why would somebody show up to vote when they don't have anything to vote for? Or if they do have a statewide election and all four of your candidates sound the same, I mean, you might as well flip a coin, right? I mean, you're right. Half the legislature has already been put back in office. How are we going to expect fundamental change in budgeting when the same people are doing the budgeting process again? In our last governor's statewide state elections in 2011, only 37% showed up to vote.
Mm-hmm.
About 1 million of our 4 million residents made a choice. So the system, I don't know if it's broken, but it needs some serious reform. We don't have candidates to vote for. The voters don't feel like voting. Money, I think, has become part of that problem. Many citizens don't feel like they can become part of this process because they're not sitting on $100,000 or $1 million. So,
you know, I've been covering politics a long part of my life, and I think this is the first statewide election that I've ever covered that has drawn so little attention from the people of this state. It's sort of like it's a non-event almost for a lot of people. I mean, am I wrong in that?
I don't think you're wrong. This is Louisiana. I mean, politics is behind college and high school football, you know, maybe the number 2 or 3 sport in the state. And it is surprising how little attention we have, and I think that's a reflection of we're getting some very generic candidates that don't speak directly to many voters. Voters are tired. We're tired of hearing the same thing. And I do think that apathy we see at the national level has filtered to our local elections.
Go ahead, Ron.
I think, Andrew, part of the issue, though, is we're looking to the wrong place to solve the problem. To expect, I mean, we just, in Governor Jindal's first administration, I mean, we got gold stars from everybody for our political reform and our high standards of transparency and accountability in government. The reality is that government will never change itself. And so to look for a group of politicians, and I am a recovering one, to come together and to actually transform their own system is ludicrous. There is a system, but it calls for citizens who hold people that they elect to office accountable. And that's what's missing. We have abdicated the responsibility of a well-informed and active citizenry to politicians. And now we're angry at them because they don't do what we have decided not to do.
So how do we get people engaged?
I mean,
is there an answer to that question?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of activist movements in our state, and people just have to keep pushing the issues that are critical to them. And don't give up and push the issues. I don't think that it is reasonable to expect a legislature where 45% of the people have been elected without opposition to go in and make radical change left to their own devices.
Barry, your group, I mean, that's part of what you do is to try to keep the public informed about the issues. And I mean, but how do we get them engaged?
It is difficult, and I got to be honest with you, election time is probably the worst time to try and do it because the campaigns slide into this mode that you're starting to see them slide into now where it's political rhetoric, it's attacks, it turns people off, people get cynical, and it's really, really hard to do it. However, I will say that we heard some issues tonight, which I mentioned before, early childhood education, Medicaid expansion, higher education. Those are priorities we have not heard talked about by candidates in typical election campaigns. So I still have hope that if they will talk about some of these and people will keep the pressure on those types of issues, that we can make change. And if these politicians are rewarded for doing the right thing instead of punished for doing something whatever, then that's where the hope is. But it is a two-way street.
Okay. Well, Stephanie, you've been sitting up there very quietly and patiently all night. I want to get to you and get your question in.
Yeah, I am concerned about issues for people with disabilities. As you probably know, 90% of people with disabilities want to live in their own homes, but the large share of the healthcare budget is controlled by nursing homes, who make huge campaign contributions to all the candidates for both the state legislatures and governor. I don't know what people with disabilities can really do. I try to help them to advocate for themselves and to speak up and put their issues on the radar, but it just doesn't seem to be working.
How about that? Anybody want to address that?
I mean, I'm the father of a now 25-year-old daughter who was born with Cornelia de Lange syndrome. And I was also a member of the Louisiana legislature, served in the Department of Health and Hospitals. The reality is that those who choose to invest in bricks and mortar have a chokehold in terms of influence on the public policy around services for people with disabilities as well as people who are aging and the choices that they have in this state. And once again, until the people of this state start saying to their elected officials that people deserve the opportunity to live in their own homes, those who are aging, as I am with each passing day, have the right to age in place in their homes, and that needs to be the policy of this state. But until that is the mantra of a significant part of this state, we will continue to see an overwhelming amount of the dollars that are provided to serve people with disabilities and those who are the frail aging especially. We will continue to see those resources buried in bricks and mortar.
You know, I want to go back a little bit. We were talking about vision and getting the candidates to respond to specific issues. The thing that strikes me most is that in the race for governor, it seems like everyone's running against the guy who's leaving. Against Bobby Jindal. He seems to come up more in this election, and he's not going to be here anymore. Why do you think that's happening, Barry?
I think that's something that people want to seize upon. They want to say, I'm going to be different than what we had here. I think you're going to see that shift a little bit to maybe another candidate that gets a little bit more of the attention. But no, I think that's part of it. I think, unfortunately, and I hate to be cynical about this, but it gets back to the point about specifics and things that people want to talk about. Everything that we do in our organization is about having transparency and information and trying to get it out. The truth is we're in an election right now with the issue so difficult that the more truth they tell about what they're going to do, the more they will probably be punished. So I know that's like heresy to say this, but that's kind of the boat that we're in right now, and it's almost like this trust me kind of thing that we are being, having to address. We've got some differences among the candidates, but not very much. You've got a party difference with one. You've got some subtle differences with others. It's really going to take the part of the voters, I think, to look at these people as deeply as they can, not just to what they have on their websites, but to kind of who they are, how passionate they are, what it is they're saying besides just in their advertising, and try and figure out who can lead us as a state. And that's a very, very hard thing to do.
How do you see that, Camille?
I would agree. And I would just add, I've never seen any election where it's not about change. Hope, change, progress, what's next. We haven't seen what that change will look like with these candidates, but change is sort of, I think, exactly what voters are looking for.
We always talk about change, but do we ever really get it?
I think we do get change. I think the current administration that Louisiana has been under for the last 8 years does stand in some stark contrast to the administration before. So I do think we get some change. We don't get radical change. We're in a conservative system. Our democracy works in conservative ways. There's never going to be a dramatic overhaul. But there are important differences, and we can establish different priorities. So our current crop, I think, has a great opportunity to move us in a healthier and a better direction, to use that word vision again, and get the legislature on board. But don't sell them a one-year plan, and don't change after 1 year. Sell them a 4 or longer year plan. Tell them where you want to make the investments and where you want to receive
Well, we started out on vision, and we're going to have to wrap up on vision, for at least this particular segment. We've run out of time for the question and answer segment. And we'd like to thank our panelists, Dr. Stockley, Mrs. Conaway, Reverend Jetson, and Mr. Irwin, for their insight on this month's topic. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
All right, Bob, so I was a little concerned about this idea of negativity and people not being involved in the process. I think the pace is going to pick up in the next few weeks, and there's going to be more involvement. I hope we talk about the issues and not just look at the commercials.
Well, I think that's a good point. And, of course, debates are a very important component of all of that. And I know LPB is trying to get the candidates engaged in debates, and other people are as well. But there seems to be some reluctance on the part of some of the candidates to actually appear in debates.
Well, we hope they all show up October 14th.
and come and express their vision. Because one of the things I think we learned tonight is that expressing their vision for Louisiana and its future is something that everyone here would like to hear.
Absolutely.
And I think all the electorate out there. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, take this month's survey, view additional sound bites, and comment on tonight's show. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, on next month's Louisiana Public Square, we'll delve deeper into an issue that came up on tonight's program. It's a topic many Louisianians hold very dear: early childhood education. Though reforms were passed by the legislature in 2012, they remain largely underfunded. How can improving early childhood programs better the state's educational outcomes, workforce, and economic outlook? Well, tune in Wednesday, October 21st for Funding the Future, Early Childhood Opportunities. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.